My name is Doug Lovegren, and my wife is May, and I get the privilege of leading the San Diego Church alongside an amazing team of 29 staff members here in San Diego, the SD Church. And I get the privilege of introducing our guest speaker this morning. It's Dr. Jennifer Conzen, who is an active, long-standing, and faithful member of our San Diego Church for well over 30 plus years. I've known Jennifer Conzen for well over 26 plus years. When I was a single intern for the San Diego Church in the mid-1990s, we worked together coordinating our congregational church services at the San Diego Convention Center. She might not remember that, but those services would be for about 4,000 to 5,000 people with kids. And she would coordinate those things for the kids, which was amazing. My wife, May, and I got closer to Jennifer when we had her come and teach our marriage events for our marriage ministry we led in Metro LA between 2010 and 2013. We would host them here in La Jolla Marriott. And Jennifer would teach on a book that she would later actually publish, and it's now called The Art of Intimate Marriage. And so over the last 14 years, we've had Jennifer speak to our North Region staff. We've helped, she's spoken to our small group leaders, our shepherds, as well as the whole San Diego church staff of 29 staff members. She's talked about self-care of ministers. She's addressed counseling and sexuality. She's addressed addiction, and she's addressed mental health. And so I have the privilege of calling her not only my sister in Christ, but she's a friend. And I love and respect Jennifer so much. We live within 20 minute drive from each other. And I love the bond that she has with my wife, May, and so appreciate she's an amazing woman of God who's seasoned in the area of sexuality, mental health, and self-care, compassion, fatigue, and burnout. She is an amazing mom, and she's a gifted marriage counselor. Professionally, Dr. Jennifer Conzen is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's the author of The Art of Intimate Marriage and Redeemed Sexuality and The Ransom Journey, Couples Recovery from Addiction. She is the director for the Center of Sexuality in San Diego. She is a certified sex therapist. She's a certified chemical dependency counselor. She is an adjunct professor at Bethel University, Alliant University, International University, and the Rocky Mountain School of Ministry and Theology. She is currently attending the Rocky Mountain School of Ministry and Theology and pursuing a master's in divinity. She has extensive teacher training completed under Douglas Jacoby for AIM, which is actually we know as the Athens Institute of Ministry. Includes New Testament survey, New Testament interpretation, Holy Spirit, evidences and apologetics, exegesis, hermeneutics, Old Testament survey, and the like. She was trained under Dr. John Oakes, many classes, conferences, and books. Jennifer's role in the teaching ministry are varied from associate editor of Teleos Journal, Western Teachers Committee for North American Teachers. She's part of the conference planning committee for the ICOC, and we get to serve together in the Ministers' Wellness Committee. Among other things, Jennifer has been teaching in our churches in regards to helping with Scripture, from how to teach the Gospels to how to worship, renewal workshops, how to respond to insults, spiritual self-care, the gifts of righteousness, knowing God, heartfelt communication with God. Let's just say the gamut of her expertise is amazing. She's been teaching at the ICOC teacher conferences on empathy in the midst of dancing the streets on the waves, the joy of David and Jesus. She's helped teach for our Ministers' Wellness Committee on self-care, compassion, fatigue, and burnout, marriage and family in the ministry, stewarding sexuality in the ministry. And she's been a teacher, speaker, director of planning committees for a number of things, even Inside Out Christian Counseling Conference that'll be there in Atlanta. I'm just so proud to call her my sister, but I'm so eager to sit at her feet today. And so she's written and published books and articles on empathy in the midst of for Teleos Journal, Dancing the Streets and Waves. She's what the Bible teaches about the chapters in various books, and a chapter on the journey of the soul and apologetics responses to the gay Christian debate. So I'm eager this morning that all of us get a chance to hear the wealth of knowledge, the heartfelt conviction, the deep conviction of God's word. We're going to sit today at Dr. Jennifer Conzen's feet this morning Let's hear her as she teaches on stewarding sexuality. I give you my friend, our sister, Dr. Jennifer Conson.
Thank you, Douglas. Douglas. I never call you Douglas. It was the
Call me
Douglas
whatever.
Jacoby piece from from Pedro. Thank you, Doug. You like read my whole CV there. Boy, okay. Now I really got to live up to it. And thank you all for coming today. We talked as a group about just this need in our fellowship, and our prayers that today will at least be a step forward in meeting this need. We are going to talk about several different areas. So I'm just going to show you what we'll talk about. We're going to do just a brief review of if you've gotten a chance to listen to any other workshops I've done on sexuality. I'm just going to tap on what those are. And then the class itself today is focused on stewarding your own sexuality, stewarding your own marital sexuality, and counseling the big challenges in your ministries. So it is for yourself personally. I hope that's what you take away from it, but then also want to give you some tools on working in your job, right, with those in your ministries. And then we'll just look at what are some of the unique challenges for people in the ministry in this area, right? So this is a review, but it might be a preview if you haven't gotten to do any other workshops on sexuality with me, then here's what they cover a little teeny taste of. So it may be a preview for you because I'm not actually going to hit a ton. I'm not going to hit on these next pieces I'm going to show you. And so actually the majority of scriptures that I typically teach on sexuality are in these classes I'm not doing today, right? So I'm going to be a little bit more practical today, not with a ton of scripture. So this begins almost every workshop I do on sexuality. Sexuality is designed by God as a way to know him more fully, looking at Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel 23, where God literally uses sexual language to convey his own heart. It's not like God over here and sex over here. God literally uses sexual language, and he does this, right, overall. He uses physical language to convey who he is, right? He does the same with sexuality. In fact, that's the language he uses to literally describe the act of sex between Joseph and Mary, Adam and Eve, is this word gnosko in the New Testament, yada in the Old Testament. So I call it the overarching understanding of erotic sexuality, this idea of deep, intimate knowing of one another. It's the same word that's used where Jesus says, I know the Father knows me, I know the sheep, and the sheep know my voice. So this undergirds pretty much anytime I teach a class to marrieds, to singles campus teens on what is our understanding of sexuality biblically, right? And then, of course, this is an important one, that next piece of the word knowing, that knowing God guards and guides our sexuality. In Romans, he said they did not retain the gnosko of God, but instead he gave them over, right? And so our retaining of the gnosko of God is what guards and guides our sexuality. That's really important. I work, like Doug mentioned, as a addiction counselor and a sex therapist, and then I teach a bit on it, right? So there are a lot of things we're going to go over today about what will help people in stewarding their sexuality. And yes, the number one thing that helps us steward our sexuality is our knowing of God. And this isn't just our mental, I know God, I go to church, I read my Bible. This is a deep, intimate knowledge and closeness to him. Buy Virginia's book on meditations and deepen that in your ministries, right? Go to Robert Carrillo's webinars and deepen that knowing of God. That's really the key to stewarding our sexuality. And then, of course, the Bible is the only world religion text that has an entire book devoted to sensuality and sexuality. So the Bible is actually super sex positive. The majority of scriptures on sexuality in the Bible, like 90%, 95% of them, are on what not to do. They're on sexual sin. The scriptures that are on how we should live out our sexuality are very sex positive. God is sex positive as a term that's actually used in the field that I work in, and it's true. And we see it from the fact that he actually prioritizes sensuality and sexuality in the Bible. It's not God over here, sex over here at all. It's the opposite, actually. Now, within our churches, that's not always lived out, this openness around sexuality. We tend to only address sexuality when sin is involved. I was preparing, I sent out a notification of what I was going to be teaching at the for the Denver Youth and Family Conference a number of years ago. They asked me to teach there, and the class was called How to Teach Your Kids About Sexuality. So I get there, and on the flyer, it says How to Teach Your Kids About Sexuality and Purity. And I was laughing. I was like, we couldn't just put How to Teach Your Kids About Sex. We had to stick the word purity in there. It's like, so we are comfortable talking about it if we're talking about it in terms of purity or LGBT now with Guy Hammond. We've got to learn to talk about sexuality openly, just period, right? There's a real challenge with knowing how to talk about sexuality in our families and in our ministries. The class I get asked to teach to marrieds and to campus singles teens. The class I don't get asked to teach on that needs to be taught in all of our churches or something like it is how to teach your kids about sex, because it actually starts super young. And then it shows up in our ministries and I'm going to show you some really practical things about how to get that talking going in our families and in our ministries. With our singles campus teens, we often don't teach about how sex positive God is and how God intends our sexuality to be. We tend to only teach about what not to do, right? What the wait until you're married kind of picture, right? And this is a big one. This is why I'll get phone calls on this a bit from leaders like yourselves, elders, when there's sexual problems with couples. We don't know how to talk about that. So I'm hoping today I'll give you some skills on that. Then when sexual sin is happening in people's lives, it is challenging to figure out how to respond because sexual sin is quite serious, right? It's very damaging. Paul says that very clearly. The thing is that we tend to be much more shaming to sexual sin than we do to other sins. And I'm going to talk about the extremes in a little bit, how we either toss people out or we enable them. And so, and in the middle of all that, often a shaming response to sin, which sexual sin specifically, which is quite different than when you see Jesus come on stage in John 8, right? God who said that if this couple is found to be having sex, right, premaritally in Deuteronomy, take them outside the town and stone them. The God who wrote that verse walked on stage in John 8. And you see him with a woman caught in adultery, right? And what does he do? He says, leave your,
on the call.
I
You
have
on the same thing?
compassion.
No, sexuality.
Yeah.
So go ahead and mute yourselves. He says that I don't condemn you. And so now go live your life of sin. So it's both things, right? But notice the compassion and the empathy, right? Not the shaming. We need to be like Jesus in how we deal with sexuality, right? We're going to go into that in more detail. So let's, first of all, as a leader, that's usually who's on these webinars. It is for the Ministers' Health Committee is for ministers. We have elders. We have those who are not in the full-time ministry, but are leading ministries, men and women. How's your personal sexuality going, right? How's the stewarding of it going? You'll notice I have very intentional language. I tend not to use the word purity. It is all over the scriptures. It's a beautiful word. I think we need to reclaim it. However, we've used that word in really punitive ways or really redundant ways. How's your purity, bro? Like it's just kind of negative. So we're going to talk about the overarching idea of stewarding sexuality. So we did a survey. In fact, Sean St. Jean is on this call today, and he put it together, and we got some results from that survey about marital life and about sexuality. This workshop today isn't just for marriages. This is also for singles. And so that survey revealed all kinds of things that was important to know. Number one, there's a lot of stressors in a minister's life. The whole fishbowl life, right? You're living under life expectations and under a spotlight. Your kids are. That's huge, that fishbowl. You're dealing with conflict in your ministries between you and your members, or between other leaders, or between those overseeing your ministry, right? Those interpersonal relationship issues, the lack of friendships is a huge issue. There might be cross-cultural issues. There's a lot of moving, new languages as people are changing countries, whole new cultures, even if you move from one side of the US to another, right? Whether, or from country to country. Ministers don't have a lot of people to turn to, and might not even be aware of just how seriously burnt out they're getting, or how unhealthy life is getting. So that's what the survey revealed. We found significant, moderate levels of burnout in our ministry staff. This was a survey we did of our fellowship, and moderate levels of secondary trauma, right? 20 for men, 35 for women, mental health stresses, 15% with significant marital issues. These are all people either on staff or elders, and 33% for men, 3% for women of pornography use. So it's happening. What we're going to be talking about today is happening with the people either on this screen or in your ministries and in our leadership worldwide. So we should probably be talking about it, right? There are very unique challenges for those in leadership, especially when it comes to sexuality. Like I said, that expectation in the area of sexuality to live lives that show the truth, that are great examples, right? And so there's this idea that ministry folks are exempt from sexual difficulties, whether they're single or married, that they're just not supposed to have those struggles, right? And so there's a lack of support. There's a lack of instruction. There's a lack of encouragement towards what I would call a sexual maturity and a sexual health, right? That fishbowl is not helping. So one of the things that comes up is when people are ending up going out of the ministry, the percentage of time that they go out of the ministry because of sexual problems, because of either affairs or pornography use or immorality of some kind, is high in our fellowship. I'm not saying that everybody goes out of staff is going out of staff because of sexual problems, but the percentage of that's a part of why is high. And we haven't provided a place for that support, honestly. So I'm going to talk about that, what to do. And then within our ministry staffs, there's a lack of really dealing with trauma in people's personal background, both just family trauma as well as sexual trauma. Someone might have become a Christian, put it behind them, but that it's there. The Body Keeps the Score is a great book to read by Bessel van der Kolk. It stays in the body, and then they become ministers, and we haven't dealt with them, and then they turn 50 and they implode, right? Or they're 25 and they implode. We have to do a better job, because trauma isn't just to the people you're ministering to, right? This was also from the survey. This is actually from Scazzero's work, by the way, the Emotionally Healthy Church. A third of ministry staff having sexual difficulty in their marriage, 12% doing inappropriate physical involvement outside of marriage, 38% doing internet pornography. So you'll actually see our numbers pretty much reflect larger Christianity numbers, right? So how does an individual in the ministry gain a more healthy view of sexuality? Have you taken time yourself personally, those of you listening today, to gain a better understanding of what the Bible teaches around sexuality? Most people haven't actually. They teach on it. They teach on don't have sex before marriage. They might mention it in a sermon, but have you done a deep dive on what does the Bible teach about sexuality? I help you out. You can go get my book, The Art of Intimate Marriage, and it's got a whole chapter on it. So when I did my first lesson, this is before I specialized in sexuality, I did my first lesson for the church. I took a year to prepare it, and I looked up every single scripture in the Old and New Testament on sexuality. I wanted to make sure I was handling it correctly. And then I did it again when I was specializing and getting my doctorate and doing research on sexuality. I'm like, I don't want to listen to the world. I want to make sure I know what the Bible says, right? Have you done that? How's your own openness going? So in the field of addiction care, radical openness is the term, right? We get that. How's that actually going for you? I had a woman come up to me at one of our conferences in our fellowship She was an elder's wife, and she shared with me about her husband's use of pornography, and the two of them were the two talking about it, and that she felt really good about that. He didn't talk with others about it because it would really harm the church and harm his role as an elder. And so she asked my input. Of course, my number one input was, yeah, no, don't do that. Yeah, no, we've got to figure out how to talk openly about this stuff. Yes, with the brothers. Yes, with the sisters, if it's your struggle. And believe me, the struggle isn't just for men, it is for women, but not just with the bros, not just with the girls. It's got to also be, which that does need to happen, but also the openness needs to happen within marriages. There's this teaching out there, I shouldn't tell my wife, I should only tell the bros, right? I should only tell the girls. I don't have time today to go into the specifics, but I actually do quite a bit different direction on that, which is helping couples with an appropriate level of detail, talking openly about their process of stewarding their sexuality, of pursuing purity in their relationship regularly with the level of detail that the partner is comfortable with. So that should be initiated by you to your spouse, not your spouse asking you, but you initiating it regularly. Is that happening in your marriages? Get help if it's not. Also, we need group supports. So we tend to this isn't a future slide coming up, but we tend to do in-house, like we should just have a group. But there are great groups out there. The number of times I've sent your brothers and sisters who are in the ministry or just members of our church to an essay, a Sexaholics Anonymous group, and they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. There's so much help. There's people who have been free from pornography for 15 years. I didn't even know you could do that. There is help out there, right, in the communities, as well as we haven't set it up in our ministries. I'm going to speak to that in a moment. So how is you yourself, the person listening today, how's your own comfort talking with sexuality, right? With other people, just overall, not even about your own purity, your own struggles, if you have them, but just talking about it. How do you feel comfortable talking with other people? Do you talk about it openly in your marriage? Do you talk about it openly with your kids? Did you only have the one talk, or you only have talks about what not to do? How about within your ministries? Is it openly talked about? I want to really encourage everyone listening today, think about that. How openly do you feel about talking about sexuality? And if you don't, go get the help and the training so that you can openly, comfortably speak about it. Work through your own background. So how about your own sexuality in your marriage? How much have you dealt with the background in your own life, meaning your family of origin, and then the background in your marriage? Like growing up, there's usually a lack of openness in your own background. So your family didn't talk openly about sexuality. If I were to ask that right now, probably about 90% of people would say, yeah, we had the talk, like, wear a condom, here's a book, don't get pregnant. That was about it, right? Also, if you had trauma in your background sexually, often what happens is people become Christians, and they study about sin, and they learn about sexual sin, and they go, oh my goodness, I had this sexual encounter, I need to repent. And that's the last time they talk about it. And it doesn't get discussed about all the trauma that happened during that, either promiscuity or sexual risk-taking or literal sexual abuse that happened in the family, right? That's huge. So have you done that? You listening today, have you done that, right? The background in your own marriage. Has there been betrayals in your own marriage? The use of pornography, any extramarital sexuality, but also, if not just recently, sometimes what comes up is the betrayal happened early in your relationship, premaritally, before you became Christians, or early on in your marriage, and maybe it was 20 years ago. But I have found that when couples come to see me who are disciples, who are leaders in our church, they've often not dealt with some of the problems, some of the pain, and so it keeps popping up, right? So how's that going in your own marriage? If that's occurred at any time, even before you were a Christian, we tend to do the whole good job, you forgave him, you forgave her, move on when people become Christians. And then we don't deal with, I had a couple where before they were Christians, he had an affair. They became Christians. By the time they came to see me, they'd been Christians 25 years. They were leaders, and they only came to see me because they just wanted to make things better. They didn't have any problems in their marriage. It was a part of a research study. It was almost free to come see me. So they're like, sure. Up came in the process of therapy pain from 25 years ago that they've never dealt with, because she found a slip of paper that he'd written to this woman about her kisses, and their kissing had completely disappeared in their sexual relationship. And here it was 25 years later, and they'd both almost forgotten why. They had never worked through it. It was really it was really healing for them to finally get that care. So check that background stuff. And then how much of a priority is your overall relationship, not sexual relationship? Is your marriage a priority, or are you out there saving churches, saving kingdoms? And your marriage, you don't have dates, you don't talk much, you're not emotionally connected, right? Do you prioritize? Do you go on trips just with your spouse, or do you always visit family? Right? So, how is the prioritizing of your own marriage? How's touch and affection going? When sexuality is problematic, usually the problems go all the way to touch and affection and to the emotional intimacy in the relationship. And we don't talk much about touch and affection, and it can be a huge issue. If sex is a problem, often touch gets withdrawn for various reasons. And so, or there's just not a lot of touch going on, and the couple doesn't know how to talk about it. A whole chapter on that, by the way. Also, in your own marriage, is there a mutual enjoyment of sex? We prioritize sex as if it's just a male need. Number one, what if the female has the higher sex drive? Number two, we tend to teach, and I'm going to look at relearning 1 Corinthians 7, but we tend to teach this whole idea of we don't want him, it's usually put in male terms, we don't want him to struggle, so ladies, make sure you're giving him enough sex. And so this idea of duty sex, I'm not going to go into it today. It has been so destructive to marriages worldwide, in Christianity, and in our fellowship, right? Sexuality in a marital relationship needs to be mutually enjoyable. If it's not, for those of you listening today, please get some care for that so that it can be, right? And then I'm going to go into some other pieces as we go. Oh, by the way, I'm going to go into how to counsel marriages close to the end of our talk here. So I want you to apply all those slides to yourself when I get there. If there's been any betrayals, really looking at in your own marriage, there is a period of recovery, and we don't give a lot of room for it, especially if people are in the ministry. There are individuals that I've worked with where a betrayal happens and then they just go on. You know, they're doing life, they're building churches. And so they've never actually gone through a recovery period, right? Or if, let's say, it is more often, I don't mean to say women don't also betray and women aren't also doing pornography, but it is more often a male. So when she gets triggered by seeing him pick up his phone, or they're watching a movie together, often what will happen if she shares that trigger, the whole idea of, oh my gosh, when are you going to let go of that? You're still holding me putting me in a doghouse. You need to forgive. Or she shares it with another woman and she's told, you're holding a record of wrongs. There is a difference between a trauma response and a record of wrongs. They can be intertwined, but it's really important to know that difference. That when a trauma comes up, how beautiful it is if a partner, so this you can use for those you're counseling and use it for your own marriage. If a partner says, right, when you saw me pick up my phone, it brought up everything from what you found. And that makes sense because I did that. I am so sorry that what I did still comes up for you now. And it makes sense that it does. I'm so glad you shared it. Please share it anytime it comes up. What do you need from me? Do you need me just to listen? Do you need a hug? Do you need me to show you what's on my phone? Do you need me to share with you how I'm doing? That's what I call the healing conversation when those triggers happen. It's got a silly mnemonic RVOG. I'm going to show you a slide later with it on there, but I just wanted to give it to you, not for those in your ministry, but for you, so that if it comes up, you have a tool to have a healing response anytime it comes up in your marriage, right? There is a need for staff couples, for personal wholeness, for purity of thought and conduct, for relationships that are emotionally safe. This is a big one that comes up with ministry couples where I'm working on their sexuality, but they're not emotionally deeply vulnerable in their marriage. They need a mutual sense of adventure and discovery. Again, going on dates, having fun, laughing together. How's that going? Dealing with that background. So, my biggest recommendation is that get training for your sexual education, not for your ministry, for your sexual ethics, for your sexual integrity, like what we're doing today. Today is honestly just a taste, though. So identify what your challenges are as you're listening. How's your own purity going? I'm going to show you the action plan a little bit later that I give when I'm dealing with sexual addiction. Put one in place in your life. Get in a support group. We need to create support groups for ministers in our fellowship that are anonymous, just like an SA group. We need it. I have ministers who come to see me. They have nowhere to go where their job is not on the line if they talk about what's going on. And because the job is on the line, it causes ministers to hide. We've had some pretty big blowups online this last year in this area. Why does that happen? Because we don't have space. Okay, there's a lot of reasons for why that happens, but one of the reasons why it happens is we don't have space in our ministry, a safe place for people to go and talk. We need to create support groups. Honestly, I'm just appealing to everybody listening today. Let's create some support groups for ministers, men and women, by the way, not just men. Women also struggle. I want to just plug this. Women don't prioritize their own enjoyment. Like I said, mutual enjoyment because of past teachings, right, that I mentioned. And also, we tend to not teach correctly on who owns their body, that a female needs to have ownership of her body. So, brief little mention in there, much longer conversation. I do want to encourage you. We did a workshop on marriage and family in the ministry, and the diakonos shared. And because they shared it publicly, I'm just mentioning it again here. He shared in the meeting preparing for the webinar. So you can go back and watch it. And I said, hey, can you share this when we do the public webinar? And he did. And he shared about pressuring his wife to have sex, that she needed to meet his needs, that he had a lot of stress in the ministry, and the damage that that did to their marriage and how he turned that around. I want to just encourage you, go back and watch just that little piece. It was very vulnerable of him. It was very honest, and it is a real thing that's going on, where it's placed on women that in order to remain sexually and to have sexual integrity, sexual impurity, it's the responsibility is placed on the wife, and that's just not what's actually scriptural. And it's also doesn't exactly help build a healthy sexual relationship for the married couple. So go ahead and watch that. So in this fishbowl, what do we need? What do you need? Counseling and support for the ministers. I don't actually mean just around sexuality. I mean, we're trying to do that in the Ministers' Health Committee, but we need it on a huge way. Work through your family background. We need some real training on marriage in the ministry before people go in the ministry, sexuality in the ministry before people go in the ministry, or right early when they're in it. Let's tell the truth about the impact ministry takes on marriages so that people can count the cost, right? Before they go into the ministry. And then we can set them up better. We need some real training pre or right as they go into the ministry. And okay, I appeal to everyone listening. Please do marriage retreats for your marriages, for your ministry staffs. Like literally nobody there that's in your ministry, only like the San Diego and the LA staff, all of the elders together. They have an elders retreat every year. Do an elders retreat where the whole retreat is on their marriages, on their sexuality. Not, remember when you're running a marriage retreat for all of your people, you're not, I mean, and then you have a bump on the way there and you feel terrible about leading the marriage retreat, and you're having like, have a marriage retreat for you. So I'm appealing to Everybody listening, let's do that this next year. Seriously, have marriage retreats for you guys, right? So, in my experience, what I just said right now, the wives, I'm just speaking for them. I'm just saying, it's not that the men don't come and talk to me, but the women are the ones that will come, and I'll say something like this, and they come up. Your wives, the evangelist wives, the elders' wives, the women who are single, they come up and say, Jennifer, 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 can we? And then it stops from there. I'm not going to say that, hey guys, how come you're not responding? Because actually, I know that the men I work with are super supportive. Okay. So how do you, maybe this is what you really came for, was how do you counsel sexuality in your ministries? Number one, get the parenting class. I call mine, How Do You Talk to Your Kids About Sex? I'd love to do it for you. It's the one that gets used the least in all of my classes. Start there, right? Give the class when the parents don't give them to the toddlers. Give it to the parents when their kids are toddlers, right? Then teach it again when they're entering school. The talk that happens, I always recommend to children, is around kindergarten, first grade, where the parents talk to their kids about how babies are made, right? Penis in the vagina. That should happen before they come onto the first grade playground. In America, that's what it would be in a lot of public schools. What that means is before they're hearing it from all the older kids on the playground, right? That talk should happen relatively early. Then give it again when they're before they hit puberty, not while they're in puberty. Do it at fourth and fifth grade, right? And then absolutely again. Now, what I mean by the classes, teach the parents. That's what this first bullet is. We need to have how to teach your kids about sex when teach those parents when their kids are toddlers, teach those parents again when their kids are coming into grade school, teach those parents again when they're coming into middle school, teach them again when they're coming into high school. We need to make it normal to do this in our churches. And then in your ministries, let me give you some ideas. Have a church-wide lesson on sexuality. What I mean is all the marrieds, all the singles, all the teens, all the men, all the women in one room, all together. So this is what Winnipeg did. And actually, this is kind of a thing that I now recommend anytime I travel. Have me do a lesson for your entire church. Whatever that looks like on your end, let's model what it looks like to talk openly about sexuality in the family by even how we teach it at a church-wide level. Doing classes for teens, campus singles. I tend to do mine where the men and the women are in the room together to, again, model it, and then they break up for questions, right? I'm actually going to one of the teen camps and doing that this summer. I just did Redeem Sexuality for London, right? So online. So that's huge, right? We need to talk about sexuality openly in our teen ministries, our campus ministries, and singles ministries. So one of the things that people are doing is finding a trusted book on sexuality and doing it in their small groups. So in other words, the teen ministries, I'll just use my book. You don't have to use my book, but I'm using it as an example because I know what's in there. Where they're doing redeemed sexuality in between the teen female leader and the girls, and the male teen leader and the boys. Between some of the campus ministries are doing it co-ed because the book can be totally done co-ed, and some of them are the singles groups are doing it co-ed, or they're doing it separately. That's what LA did it separately. Boston did it co-ed. Winnipeg, the entire church read Redeemed Sexuality in their small groups for a few months. So we can talk about sexuality more openly, and we need to. And then the marrieds groups can do a book like Douglas Rosenau's Celebration of Sex, or mine, The Art of Intimate Marriage, in the married group, and then talk about it. I actually wrote a workbook to go along with it so that it could guide people on how to do it. So you don't go to those dangerous areas and say things about your spouse you shouldn't say. So having the tools to get that talking going is huge. So that's the first thing, get everybody talking. Then how do we talk about pornography? One of the first things to do is consider when you discover the use of your spouse's pornography use, your child's pornography use, somebody in your ministry's pornography use, how do you respond? Remember 2 Corinthians 5, you are a messenger of reconciliation. Remember that. There's that term right there. will help us be like Jesus, right? Share your own challenges, age appropriately if it's a teenager, if it's a kid, but, and even, protecting information that might also influence what gets out there publicly or to your children, right? But be open about your own challenges. And then make sure to counsel not just about not using porn, but about why they're using it. Often, so James 1 says that each man is by his own evil desire, he's pulled away and enticed. What are the desires? What are the pulls, right? Finding that out. Often what I find, so I have a number of men in my office who are 25-ish, like mid-20s. They're disciples. They've been disciples since they were teens. They started pornography when they were 8 or 10, right now, regularly in my office, your brothers. I also have your sisters, same thing. They've been doing porn since they were 8 because it used to start at like 12, 13. It's starting at about 8 now. And all they've heard is don't do it, right? We need to talk about why. There's a reason they're using it. Find out why. And then you can use my book. It's written for marrieds, The Ransom Journey. It has an action plan in it. I'm going to show it to you in a moment. Put together a plan, not just for how not to use porn, but what to do for when they're pulled, when they're bored, what to do, when they're trying to fall asleep, what do you do? When they're anxious, what do you do? Put together a plan for those pulls, right? We do need to carefully use scripture, not just to bang it over their head, but to correct, to teach, to rebuke, to encourage. Notice the first and fourth word there. We tend to do the second and third word really well, but we need to teach correctly about sexuality. We need to encourage, right? Teach them about the objectification of the body. I actually had one of my kids just last week said to me, he goes, I will never forget the talks we had about how the pornography I was looking at treated the human body. That really helped me, Mom. It's a conversation last week. I was like, hey, good that stuck with him because he actually honors people and he didn't want to dishonor people. That helped him, right? And then we need to put protections on their devices. So go look at that. There's a number of them to use. I'm going to talk about counseling sexuality, addiction in a moment, but this is the action plan, and you can find a whole chapter on how to put this together for yourself, for your children, for your ministries. Yeah, so it's not just don't use porn. It's what do you do for the reasons you use porn? What's your plan? They have to identify the triggers in this. So you'll see it right here, high risk situations, warning signs. So what are the high risk situations? Like with drinking, we know that if you go to a wedding or you go into a bar, right, you might be more likely to drink, right? Same thing with sexual addiction. When's the most likely time? Late at night, when you're tired, when you can't sleep, when you're bored. Let's make a plan for each of those times. And then what are your warning signs when you're most likely to use pornography? Stress, when there's been conflict, when you're bored, right? Identify those and make an action plan. All right, let's move from there to talking about same-sex attraction. Guy Hammond handles this, but I just want to share with you my end of it. I'm on Guy's board, by the way. In fact, he right now is in South Africa. I'm on his prayer team. And so pray for him. He's in going to Johannesburg this next week, he and Laura. So check your own convictions and heart about the LGBT community. If you go, if you have an internal negative response, go get some help with that. Go read Guy's book, Caring Beyond the Margins. If you haven't read his book and you're in this talk, please go buy his book today, right? Doing it in a calm, matter-of-fact, non-reactionary, respectful way is huge. Not just with people who are same-sex attracted, but with your kids, with your teenagers in church who come up and say, I have gay friends. I think they love Jesus. How do you have that conversation without your heart like bursting out of your chest, right? So get the help that you need to so that you can in the right heart have that conversation, right? Find out what they're hearing. Your singles, your campus, your teens, especially right now. But I get calls from married couples where I got 2 of them this week. My wife says she's asexual. My husband says he's asexual. What do we do? Literally, that was to my email this week, right? I have clients whose children have had parts of their bodies removed We need to be able to have those conversations honestly, openly, right? So they've gone through some kind of gender transition. Be aware of what they're listening to, not in a condemning way. Learn from them what they're hearing, what they're reading. I do think it's important. Guy does a great job on this. There's a difference between sexual attraction and actually living a homosexual lifestyle. If that's something new to you, please go on his website, check it out. We have a huge issue in our churches happening right now. I get called to teach on this one a bit, on gender. That is actually a so the development of sexual attraction and the development of gender is where my background comes in. And one of the challenges we have in our churches is we have a very rigid idea of gender. It's not just our churches. It's Christianity, it's the world, right? That this is what a boy is, this is what a girl is, and we need to say masculinity and femininity. In case you haven't read, we're kind of past that being a helpful way to approach things. And we are reactive. If somebody dresses a certain way, talks a certain way, acts a certain way that doesn't fit in what we think of as normative masculinity and femininity. I don't know all the answers to your situation in your ministry, but I do know this. We need to work on our reactivity. We need to help our parents with grief, because we've got a whole ministry devoted to that, by the way. If you've got parents with this, they need to be in the parent support group that is in the strength and weakness ministry. By the way, Guy Hammond, I'm just going to say this, he should not be traveling the world drumming up money for his ministry. We support Hope Worldwide as an entire church, right? We should be supporting Guy Hammond church-wide. We desperately need his work. He shouldn't be drumming up money, just putting my plug in. Okay, they have a whole support group for parents. They have meetings every week. We need to help our parents know about that and be a part of that, right? About how to have limits in their home and how to do boundaries, right? Give them help and support. So go look up that stuff, right? I get asked sometimes to teach in our churches on LGBT regularly, actually. But often it's out of fear, and the leaders want me to come and throw down the truth. The truth is this. This is sin. Stop doing it. I don't do it that way. I do an overarching, let me teach you about what sexuality is in the Bible, and then let me help you learn how to learn the Bible. Because they're reading all this stuff online about how you can be gay and be a Christian. And if you go in with a sledgehammer and say, that's not true, versus teach them how to love God and how to read their Bibles. They need to learn how to correctly handle the scriptures. So that's actually how I teach it, by the way, and I get some pushback on that because they want me to throw down the this is sin thing. I don't think it's going to work in most of our, especially not from the pulpit. Right? Maybe absolutely, we should be teaching the scriptures accurately. It's just how we do it that's key. How about counseling in your singles ministries? Number one, I already mentioned it, talk openly and honestly, not just about sexuality. Sorry, not just about purity. And let me tell you this, the singles all over the world are saying to me, we want to talk about it with the marrieds, but every time we walk in the room, they go, shh, shh, shh. So marrieds, your singles would love to talk to you about your sexuality. You don't have to give all the details. They want to talk about, you know what the questions they ask me at workshops? They want to know when you're married, the singles and the campus and the teens ask this. When you're married, can you use pornography? Should you do masturbation? Is anal sex okay? Is pornography okay? Can you use vibrators? All of those questions get asked by all the married groups I teach. They also get asked by all your singles, campus, and teens. Where are they going to go for those answers? Guess where? They're going to go to the internet. They're going to go to each other. So I think maybe we should be talking about it. Like, let's just talk about it. So I actually have the whole list of what's allowed is in my singles book. Why? So that they can understand if I'm going to help a married couple decide whether to use a vibrator or not, and whether to engage in certain positions in sexuality, that they know the guidelines. I will give somebody in helping. I don't tell people what to do in their marital sexuality, but I give them scriptures, and I called it my what's allowed list. I put that in the Redeemed Sexuality book because they're asking, right? So also with singlehood, not just sexuality, but singlehood, we privilege the married relationship worldwide. Look at our ministry staffs. They're almost all married. If you're, I just had a sister who spoke for a huge singles conference that's been going on for like 25 years, the singles conference. She's single. She spoke on sexuality, and she said she was the first single to teach the keynote for the singles conference in 25 years. It had all been married people leading the singles conferences. I'm like, what the heck? We have to, like, okay, we know this. Look at Paul. Who wrote the most on sexuality in the Bible? Jesus and Paul, both unmarried. Even when it comes to sexuality, we privilege marital stuff where the Bible does not. The greatest teacher on the body and sexuality is the unmarried evangelist in the scriptures, right? So also, I'm going to use San Diego as an example, but this is true pretty much worldwide. San Diego is 50% single. Actually, if you look at it demographically, we have a lot of engineers and we have a lot of biochem stuff here. And we need full-time staff for our ministries that are single, right? And this is worldwide, guys. It's not just like here. It's not just any one church. We don't have single full-time staff. It's not, and it's an issue for men, but it's really an issue for the women. So in Orlando, I taught 3 classes at the Orlando conference, and only one of them was actually to the ministry staffs, but on every talk, I threw in a slide that said "Save the males." I teach worldwide, and your single older sisters, meaning like 30s, 40s, and 50s, are in pain and in grief. They have no men to marry and they're looking out there, and we're upset with them for going on these dating websites. I'm not recommending that. But the thing is, we just need to, let's have a campaign worldwide, save the males, right? So your sisters come to me every church I go to, the older single women, older meaning sharp, great jobs, beautiful, they're making good money, they're like strong spiritually, 30s, 40s, 50s, and nobody there to be partnered with. We have to change it, right? I want to hit on a couple other areas before we're done, before we actually end with counseling married sexuality. Specifically because I get this call, how do we deal with sexual abuse in our churches? I don't mean necessarily like that happens in our churches, although that too. Somebody asked me when the lawsuits came out in the article for Rolling Stone, Jennifer, are you getting, actually, it was Greg Mutzke asked me, so have you gotten a ton of phone calls? And I said, I haven't. I've gotten a couple. And I said, I should, though. I don't mean that like I'm the answer to all of it. I just mean we go legal. We strengthen how to do it right legally, but we don't go therapeutically. Our churches are traumatized, honestly, just like any church, any family, think of it as far as a physical family. If there's been sexual abuse, and I work with your brothers and sisters where somebody in the family sexually abused somebody else in the family. I've got 3 or 4 of those in my office right now in our fellowship, right? It traumatizes the whole entire family, all the kids, the parents, the extended family, all of their friends. Do you stay friends with this person if they end up in jail? Do you bring them back in the fellowship? What about the kids as they're growing up? What about the child who's been abused and all of the stuff they're going through? So we know that in physical families, sort of. But let me tell you, even that's a sort of. But that's our spiritual family as well. There have been abuse says within our fellowship, and we're not talking about it openly and honestly, the impact that it has on our family, on the kids, that's us and all of our members, on the kids in the family, right? So when it comes to sexual abuse in the churches, just a plug for, we need therapeutic care, not just legal, doing the right thing legally. We need therapeutic care within our churches around sexual abuse. So as far as your own counseling, always make sure to check the details on someone's trauma. If you're counseling someone with trauma, ask them about it. You don't necessarily need to have them share all the details because they might need to do that in a different environment, or maybe as they get to know you more, or future conversation. Even when people come to see me, they won't tell me the details right away, and I tell them when you're ready, right? But find out what if there was sexual abuse in their background, any molestation, any rape, any violating touches. So ask those questions, not just, and also if it happened while they were in their risky sexuality. If people have a sexual abuse background in their family growing up, then they end up going into risky sexuality and engaging with lots of partners. They come and they study in the church and they find out and they think of it only in terms of sin. And number one, they don't realize that their risky sexuality was very, very likely because of the trauma, right? It's a pretty common piece. And that they were used and abused by those people they were having sex with. And then check on when they did talk to anybody about what happened to them. How did people respond? How was the caregiver response? Their parents, the church leader, how was the response? Because that will re-traumatize hugely, and it's happening all over the place. And then are they having any current trauma responses? So ask about those kinds of things, right? It really affects how people think about sexuality. Check on that. They might need to do work on their own beliefs about sexuality. And I just hit this during the sin study and onward. And then if you're working with them as a married couple, there might be sexual avoidance in their marriage, pretty common. The trauma might come up while they're having sex, very common. And it can affect, and I'll be talking about this in a moment, it can affect their sexual functioning as well. So we're not always, and today won't give enough time to actually go into this, but this is a whole separate class in and of itself, by the way, on what to do when these things come up for married couples. There is the right way to counsel this. If this feels as if you're hearing it right now and you're like, ooh, I really need some help on this, I do have a whole chapter in the Art of Intimate Marriage on problems and sexual abuse when it comes up and how to respond to it. So we need, if you're not yourself like, oh gosh, I wouldn't even know what to do, then just know who you would send them to. Know who your referral would be. I don't mean necessarily just even a professional referral, but a disciple that, feels comfortable in those kinds of things. We do now know that if that's in someone's background, any kind of trauma, the term is called complex PTSD, just so that you know this, so that if you hear it, if they go to a therapist and they tell you this, it's actually in the ICD-11. It's not yet in the DSM, the American manual. It needs to be, where people have been exposed to ongoing traumas, either in childhood or in adulthood. It can happen with sexual assault too, where it's not necessarily like penetrative sexual abuse, but sexual comments, touches. This is the whole Me Too movement, right? It's underreported with men, but actually, if you include sexual assault, if you include incarcerated men, it's almost equal. So don't assume that because you're working with a young male or a married male that this doesn't apply to him, right? If there's trauma in the marriage relationship, check on that, right? Because especially if it's ongoing, let's say the pornography use just kept going, or they've had serial affairs, the level of trauma that causes literally has a name now. The kind of casual name is betrayal trauma. The technical name is complex PTSD. Also, I want to emphasize this is a thing happening in our marriages, in our fellowship, the idea of marital rape, when she has said no and he goes ahead. And that no might be either about what he wants to do or about how he wants to do it or how often he wants to do it. I won't go into the details of that today, but this is a real thing that's happening. I'll have situations where I'll just put it in terms of what's more common. A wife will say, no, I don't feel comfortable with anal sex. It's painful. They go off on a vacation. They're in the hotel room. He turns her over, enters her from behind in the anus, and they never talk about it again. That's marital rape. So it's just important that we call it what it is and that it's actually happening, right? It is actually in all of the states in the United States on it's in the law in all the states. So we just don't talk about it as a church, actually, even though it's a thing. There are counseling that you want to pay attention to in specific situations, like this whole idea of it's not happening in our churches. It is addressing older singles. I have had older single men who are widowed, older single women who are widowed, and they're like, "Can we talk about this?" I had the best time with the widows in New York last year, and they were like, "Can we talk about this?" We just think those groups, it doesn't apply to them. That's not accurate, right? The singles parents who used to be married are like, I used to be wake up and somebody's holding me. I go to bed with someone in the bed next to me. Now I wake up alone. We don't talk about that, right? So I miss the hugs. I miss being held, right? The missing touch is huge, right? So our typical answers to these specialty situations is just don't do it and God is enough. Thanks for being open. You know, we need to give them more than that, right? God's enough. Thanks for being open. Let's not do that anymore. Okay. Sexual addiction specifically, because we are going to get to our Q&A. Let me just give you some keys for you as ministers in counseling. Let me just give you some definitions. What is sexual addiction? It's continuing use, even, and I'm saying pornography here, but it can be they're going into massage parlors, they're going to peep shows, they're looking at lingerie ads. So this is in my office a bit. Continuing pornography use despite the adverse consequences. It might be because they'll lose their job, but they keep doing it. They might lose their marriage, but they keep doing it. They get euphoria while they're online, or they use it to lower anxiety. They feel unable to stop. They keep doing it even though they keep trying to stop. And then they end up either spending more and more time, or they're escalating use. They started off with looking at pictures, then they went to videos, then they went to live. Now they're meeting people. Escalatory use. That's addiction. They're neglecting their partners and friends and family. They feel empty and distressed if they're not doing it, right? So that's withdrawal. They lie to family and especially now, if this is happening and someone's on staff, you can just imagine, right? They're lying and covering up their use, right? They have certain rituals about how they use. And then even when they try to stop, their mind keeps having flashes of pictures. 10 to 20 years later, those pictures are still flashing in their mind, right? And so those impulses are very challenging, just like somebody wanting to use meth or cocaine, and the urges keep coming, right? The cravings. So let me just point out what I call, this is in my book, The Ransom Journey, what I call the pillars of recovery. I get asked this, I get calls from elders, from evangelists. How do we help this person? Number one, they do need to have a solid spiritual direction, right? A trusted friend and mentor. They need to be strong in get into their Bible and build with God. Those two we do pretty well. It's all the rest we don't do. To tell you honestly, we don't do the rest. Individual care. They need to go see a therapist to find out why they're using. They need to be in group support. This is the number one that we don't do. We do the whole talk to the bros thing that I was talking about earlier. And so when I work with an individual, I don't say you have to be in group support. If I work with a couple, I will not work with the couple if the person in sexual addiction is not in group support. I want to let you know that. I don't do that with an individual because I'm not harming a partner. The partner is not my partner, is not my client. But if I'm doing couples work, if I don't make sure they're really getting good care, then I'm continuing to harm the partner. So I do require that, just so you know how I do that. They need to have a sponsor, either like an SA sponsor or some kind of mentor in the recovery group they're in. So they need to be in a recovery group and they need to have a sponsor. And then they need to work a program. They need to have the workbook. They need to do the 12 steps, whatever program they're in. And then they need to go to couples counseling. I'm putting this in here today because I get asked this a lot from staffs. What should we be doing when someone's engaging these kind of behaviors and it keeps going. Let me tell you, in the 12-step programs, sexual addiction programs, people are pornography free for 15, 20 years and they're mentors. Wouldn't you want one of your folks to have that person as a mentor? Yes, they use the term, uh, hello, the power word. They don't use the word God as much. They need the help and the support. We also need to build it in our churches. So they need mentors, all of this above. So I get asked this when people have been disfellowshipped from the church and when are they ready to return? Early recovery is 6 months to 1 year. So how long should they be in good recovery? I don't have that answer for you, but I just tell people relapse rates are really high in that first year. And we tell people, move back in with your wife. Wife, you need to have more sex with him. Actually, in the field of addiction care, they advise no sex of any kind for 30 to 90 days, 1 to 3 months. No masturbation, no pornography, no sex with your spouse. And yet what we're doing as churches is we're telling the partner, you better have sex with him so that he doesn't, we might not say it like that now, we're getting better, but hey, help him out, make sure. This comes up a lot. I literally had a situation where a husband had molested a child, they're separated, and the input given to the wife was, can you help him out somehow? That is so traumatic and wrong, right? We have got to follow what we actually know from research. They need to detox from sexuality. Just like if they've been drinking a ton, you wouldn't say go drink more, just do it at home when your wife's there. You would actually say, hey, you should probably not have alcohol, maybe for a long time. So they need a detox from sexuality so they can relearn. They need to get their head above water so that they can relearn how to interact with sexuality in a new way before they engage with their spouse. So the pillars also of attitude. So those are the actions of attitude, is that they openly initiate sharing what they're learning. They openly share if they have a struggle. They initiate getting help. They have a non-defensive response when they're asked how they're doing. They initiate getting help from other couples and from a therapist, so getting additional care, and they're getting help with the underlying reasons for use, anger, depression, anxiety, and they're on the path to learning that. Again, if you want to know what should we look for, that's my recommendation, right? Here's the RVOG. I just threw it in here so you'd have it. This is what I do to help couples whenever the trigger happens. I do get asked, should they stay together? Should they come back together? Should they move in? Do they separate? Do they divorce? I have a whole chapter on it in the ransom journey, whether they move back in. So it's a process I call discernment therapy. I actually take them through a 6-week and then a 6-month process to help them figure out whether to separate, whether to move back in. So if that's a question for you, go read Douglas Jacoby's 5 lessons on separation, divorce, and remarriage. Please, 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 please go read Douglas Jacoby's 5 lessons on divorce, separation, and remarriage. And then go read my chapter on discernment therapy on this. The chapter is called State of the Union. So when we respond to addiction, we often respond either with, we remove them from the church, right? We disfellowship them, or we keep them in the church and we don't deal with them. We have these like extremes, right? We say, you must stay married or you need to leave them, these extremes. I think there's an in between. I don't have more time to do that today, and then go get help outside. All right, how about our marriages? We need to relearn sexuality. If this sounds new to you, go look at the chapter in my book, The Art of Intimate Marriage. There's a whole section on there on relearning 1 Corinthians 7. We've used it to teach that it's appropriate to expect and demand sexuality. Maybe we haven't used those words, but it's that idea of, hey, ladies, if you don't want him to struggle, make sure you have plenty of sex, right? So we need to relearn 1 Corinthians 7. So I call that the stewardship within marriage. I've hit this already today, so I'm going to go past it. Yeah. So what about if the problems they're coming to you for, these married couples, that you are now going to become a lot more comfortable with, is if they're having erectile dysfunction, if they're having premature ejaculation, if they're having delayed ejaculation, which means they stay erect, but they don't reach an orgasm, or it takes a long time to reach an orgasm. They're experiencing sexual pain in the vulva, in the penis. They're not reaching orgasm, or if they have low desire. Low desire, what I call desire discrepancy, is the number one reason people come to see a therapist or tell their doctor or bring up problems, right? But what about these other things? When I do a survey of our fellowship, every time I teach a workshop, it's 60%. This bullet right here that starts with erectile dysfunction, 60% of our members are experiencing that bullet. And we're not talking about it because we're not comfortable with it. We need to talk about it. Go get comfortable. Go do the Art of Intimate Marriage as a group and find a way to get comfortable. Do it with your wife, your husband. Do it with your discipling couple together, right? I want to really encourage the comfort around sexual functioning. We have a vice president that talked about erectile dysfunction on an ad. I think we can do it, right? I'm just showing you, these are from my slides. We're not going to go over them. Male hypoactive sexual desire disorder, MHSTD, out of the DSM, premature ejaculation. That's just a really funny slide. Erectile dysfunction, delayed ejaculation. I just think that's a really funny slide. Desire and arousal disorders, orgasmic disorders, and sexual pain. This is happening in your couples. If all of this sounds unfamiliar, get somebody to your ministry to teach on this topic to your marrieds. And not just to your older marrieds, because let me tell you, it's happening a lot with your older marrieds, but it's happening with your younger marrieds, where they didn't have sex, they got married, and the switch is supposed to turn on. By the way, oh my gosh, this isn't even in my slides. Please, let's not do the whole, let's talk about sex with this couple that's getting married the week before their wedding. Let's not do that. They need to talk about sexuality. I don't know when, but a lot earlier than that. And in fact, if they have a sexual addiction background, that better be disclosed before he asks her to marry him. By the way, not the week before. And she needs to count the cost before she says yes to marrying him, let alone at the altar, right? So let's not have the sexuality talk the week before. Let's have it way earlier. And let's talk about the reality of these sexual difficulties, these ones in here, premaritally, because this is real. And then within our marriage workshops, I just threw this in here because it's my funniest slide. What's the difference between men and women as far as arousal? There we go. Okay. So what do I say as far as more training? Provide your staff with more training. You can take an entire course on counseling sexuality. I am the professor of it at the Rocky Mountain School of Ministry and Theology. So you can get a master's level course there. You can audit it. You don't even have to read the books and take the tests. You can just listen. So please do. I always put this at the end of every sexuality lesson. Why should we pursue purity? Why? Why should we? I actually meant to put in here, how do we pursue? Why should we pursue stewarding our sexuality? Because you were bought at a price. We are worth it, right? And that what undergirds all of it is who God is in his character and in his heart. Here's some tools. Ungame cards. All of these are in my books, by the way. The Love Map cards by Gottman. All my books. Sexuality books on recovery as well. Grace Calls by the Wideners and Pure the Journey by the Wideners. The In Motion book by Tim Summerlin. Celebration of Sex by Doug Rosenau. Support groups. The Wideners have support groups. I constantly give people that link. These are my workshops that I mentioned some of them as we went. And all of these slides can go out to everybody. Joel, by the way, we can send these out to everyone so that they have them. This is a conversation I want to recommend you have with you and your spouse. If you're single, with you and anybody you trust in your life, have this conversation. Start talking openly about sexuality. Use this slide. Take a picture of it right now. Go do this conversation with your ministry. Do it in your Bible talks. If you want to just do one little quick, how do we start talking? How did you learn about sex growing up in your family? Just talk about that. Did your family talk about sex much at all? Just do the first one and the third one. Boom. That's all you have to do. And now you've opened up the subject. Here's some materials for parents. God's Design for Sex is a series you can get on Amazon. It's so amazing. You can get on Amazon. So for parents, there are 2 pages in it that wouldn't probably go along with our belief systems, and you can just cut them out. It's the best book out there as far as funny pictures. Caring Beyond the Margins. Here are my books. And there we go. Did it. 50 minutes. That was the quickest I have ever done that. Okay, I am going to put in the chat my phone number so that for the Q&A, you can send it to my phone. It's now down there. You can send me a question to my email. I won't look at it right now, but for later. And then you can also just hit, if you don't know how to do it, go to the chat, click on where it says meeting group chat, and then choose my name, and it'll only come to me. There's a lot of names on there, huh? And it'll only come to me, or you can send it to one of our group and they can anonymously give it to me. I just wanted to give you my phone number so that you can anonymously send me questions. And I should have put that phone number in when I started teaching. Okay, so I have some questions. Are we good to start the Q&A, everyone? Okay. Nobody said no.
Just to, thank you so much. This was phenomenal. Wow, so much. My only thought is it is 10:35 Central. Maybe people want to ask questions. How about we do this? Well, I think we should, because it's 10:35. Those who want to participate in the Q&A, we can stick around for maybe 10 minutes or so. We'll keep the recording going. You can send the questions to Jen's in the chat or to that phone number in there or to her email. But feel free to go, obviously, if you need to go. But we'll keep the recording going for a little bit. Okay.
Awesome. Yes, awesome. Okay, so I've got a couple questions here. In the past, you've used the Art of Intimate Marriage and pre-marriage. Yeah, would you still recommend that as a resource and other things that you think would be important, appropriate to discuss with people? Yes, actually, people have used the Art of Intimate Marriage. The Act of Marriage by, yes. Would we still recommend that? It's a good book. It's a decent book. There are inaccuracies in the book. I would actually say there are other books that are better. I misread the question. You can actually use my book, The Art of Intimate Marriage, as premaritally, or like Douglas Rosenau's Celebration of Sex. He has both one for singles. You can actually use Redeemed Sexuality when they start dating or engaged, to study together as a couple and then do the art like the last couple of months as they're preparing. And so the Act of Marriage is a decent one, but it does have inaccuracies in it. So, and then, in a ministry, yes, there are complex intersections between mental illness and sexual sin. Big time. Thank you for bringing this up. So how can we support someone whose mental illness may be triggering or compelling them to sexual impurity? So big time. Mental health. So we have dual diagnoses now in the whole field of addiction care, right? Where it's depression and addiction. It's anxiety and addiction, right? Same thing happens with what looks like sexual sin and maybe sexual acting out, right? Risky sexuality, pornography use. They do often overlap. People will use pornography use to lower anxiety. They'll masturbate to lower anxiety or to put something of color into their life, the excitement part. So they use it for excitation and satiation. Satiating, lowering tension, and excitation, putting something exciting in their life. And we don't know how to talk about that, right? And so, yes, often people need what you call dual diagnostic care. They're getting care for the sexual acting out, the lack of safety, and they're getting care for the mental health issue, for depression, anxiety. So big time, that needs to often go hand in hand. Okay, so another question here. If someone who has a young sister who is same-sex attracted and has developed a crush on someone, wanting to handle it righteously. This is actually pretty common within our singles campus and teen ministries as well, but it also happens in the married ministries. And I would say, first of all, go get Guy Hammond's materials and read it with them. He wrote a book called Caring Beyond the Margins, but his other one on thriving beyond the margins is for somebody who's same-sex attracted. Go do that book alongside with them. One of the biggest things that I that I do with the people coming to see me is I work with how to, when that pull, that desire, the draw, the attraction, when the attraction walks in, well, number one, learning to go, it's an attraction. I love Jesus. I'm not going to act on that attraction, but it comes up. I feel the pull. That's normal, right? It may never go away. Watch Finding Guy with them. And in that, he talks about how he had this expectation he was going to stop having attraction to men. He was going to start having attraction to women. So about 10 years into marriage, he comes to Kathy and he says, his first wife, and he says, crying, I haven't been able to change it. She thought he was getting ready to say he was going back to a gay lifestyle. And what he was actually saying was, it's still there. And she was like, oh, I didn't think it was going to go away. How gracious, right, of her. Learning to live with the reality of, I'm still going to have those pulls. The attraction is still going to happen. When it happens, I do a whole process of it's called acceptance commitment therapy, where I'm noticing it. I'm taking a breath. I'm saying, I get why that's here. Not a surprise. It's understandable. And then they make the next choice based on their values. How do they want to live out, steward their sexuality? That piece on acceptance is one of the biggest keys with your brothers and sisters who are same-sex attracted that I work on, is they've been saying all kinds of nasty things about themselves to themselves, about their attraction. I'm evil, I'm dark, I'm terrible. And so actually helping them go, this is where my pulls are. This is where my attractions are. Okay, that's what it is. Now, this is how I'm going to live it out. How beautiful is that, right? So that piece, that word acceptance is key, right? I would say in the Journey of the Soul, the book Journey of the Soul, I have a chapter called Acceptance and Mindfulness. I'd say go and get that book, read that chapter, and it actually goes through the whole process on how to do accepting of emotion. How do you best support teens who identify as transgender? Yeah, so it's happening in all of our churches quite a bit. They're on the internet, and it's really scaring parents, and it's really scaring teen leaders and church leaders. The thing is, a part of it is we have a really, back to my point on rigid gender ideas, this is what a female is, this is what a male is. I had a young man say to me, he said, I love poetry. I am really caring person, and I'm really emotional, and I like having emotional talks with people. I think I'm gay. Now the language would be expanded. I think I must be a female, right? Because we think that's what a female is. I have a whole section on my own classes on gender, on how we need to demolish gender stereotypes. Biblically, God is described with female terms. Paul describes himself with female terms. Jesus describes himself with female terms. This idea, what was David? David was the warrior king, and he was also the poet, singer. We have these ideas, this is feminine, this is masculine, and it's not helping, right? Now, sometimes the feeling that I might be transgender comes from a discomfort with the physical body, which is super common. in puberty, pubescence, and adolescence, where I'll have young women come in and they want to get a nose job and they're 12 and they're 15, right? So it's the same with sexual parts of the body. I wish this wasn't a part of my body.